After 5 years since we last raced in China, and we don't get a five-race streak of 1-2 finishes, as Lando Norris completes an impressive drive to take second place. Obviously, just behind Max Verstappen winning in China to make it the 26th different circuit at which he's taken victory. Welcome to Grid Talk. Today we are here to review the Chinese Grand Prix. My name is Owain Medford, and joining me we have Formula Talk co-host Sophia Richmond.
Hi.
Aaron Harper from AHGP.
Good morning.
And F1 writer Jawad Yaqub.
Good evening.
Before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use promo code BLEAV, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus. That's BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. But first, if you enjoy this podcast, we'd love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. So, I've got some thoughts. I want to ask you all your thoughts about the Grand Prix this weekend because, personally, I thought it was I thought it was alright. I thought it was relatively interesting, but I don't think it sort of set the world alight. So we'll go to you, Aaron. Like, what was your sort of overriding thoughts about this Grand Prix?
It wasn't a classic by China's standards. I know F1 released the extended highlights of the 2010 race, which had the added jeopardy of rainfall within it. So, it wasn't a classic by China's standards, but it was an interesting race. There was strategy. We had the safety car period. I think Alonso showed that actually a 3-stop would have been really strong if more people had committed to that. It would have paid big dividends, but they want to obviously lose as little time as possible. And as soon as the safety car comes out, they thought, yeah, we can all go to the end. So Aston, through maybe shooting themselves in the foot, actually did themselves a favor. It's a weird circumstance in the way that worked out. But yeah, interesting enough race. We're still lacking that fight at the front. Obviously, Verstappen just disappearing at such a command of his car and an advantage in performance. I think that's the only thing we're missing at the moment. If we had everyone grouped together, a little bit like in the sprint race, I thought actually this is what these rules were meant to look like. Different cars, different orders, and loads of overtaking and lots of good racing. And it's not quite panned out like that, but that's a whole different conversation. The race weekend generally very interesting. We had competition for the podium. Was Lando going to get on the podium? Who was going to be there with him? Was Perez going to finish second? So lots to be interested about, but we are just lacking that extra spice for the race win. But hopefully that will come in the future.
God, I was so professional, and then I was muted, and I just chatted away. Sorry, yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. Jawad, what were your thoughts about the race? Do you sort of anything to add, or do anything different?
Not really. I agree with Aaron there that it probably wasn't a classic, but it was infinitely better than what we got for the 1000th anniversary Grand Prix back in 2019, and as well, I guess the fact that we had some safety car neutralizations to add a bit of peril in there in terms of the strategy. So I think that spiced things up a little bit. Pre-race in my live blog, I had someone comment that so Verstappen's going to pretty much, if there's no yellow flags, he's going to pretty much lap the field except for Perez, and it'll be a Red Bull 1-2 finish. So I think, it's great we didn't get that, even though we did get that familiar outcome. But yeah, like Aaron says, it's just that lead battle at the moment that we're kind of lacking, that would make things infinitely a bit better.
Yes, Theo. I mean, it's a low bar, isn't it, when you're trying to get over the 1000th Grand Prix weekend? Well, that was really boring by comparison. It really didn't sort of set up for a good race weekend. But by comparison, yeah, this is, I guess, fairly good. I think the only thing that leaves a little to be desired is maybe the yellow flag situation, where we're still waiting there for ages for the yellow flags to be cleared up.
Definitely. I mean, I agree with the guys. I mean, we had not one double stack. We pretty much had two double stacks, both by the Red Bulls as well. That went kind of smoothly. But it was it was interesting to watch. There was very much highs and lows, but as the guys have said, like it's just Max on his own kind of level. And then the rest of the battles. One thing to also mention, it was mentioned online, on live, was apparently there's discussions about dropping the points down to P12, and I think that will also help with some of the battling because it's been so kind of tight. And when we discussed today's race, like there was a lot of battling and some really good overtakes throughout the entire race. So it was a great one to watch. I'm glad I set my alarm for it.
Yeah, me too. Now, speaking of overtakes, yeah, as you say, there were some really good overtakes, and I fully agree. But on the other hand, Aaron, I'm sort of, I do apologise for giving you this one, but VCarb, not their own fault in entirely, but they were twice the I guess the innocent victim in some ridiculous overtakes from or even sometimes not even overtakes for one of them over the course of this race, weren't they?
Yeah, it was just poor driving, really. I mean, let's start with the Ricardo incident behind the safety car where he's been rear-ended by Lance Stroll. I mean, this is just going to add more credence to the Lance Stroll isn't good enough to be in Formula One. The one defense I will make for him is that F1 cars stop really fast. They drive really fast, they also stop really fast. And under the safety car, it's very easy to get caught out. We've actually seen Michael Schumacher drive into the back of someone, Juan Pablo Montoya in Monaco in 2004. So it happens. Obviously, when it's Lance Stroll doing it, everyone's going to jump on the bandwagon. I think he got caught out. It was ironically Alonso's mistake that caused it all. And it's just that concertina effect. It can happen behind the safety car. Yeah, and it kind of ruined, well, it completely ruined Daniel Ricciardo's race. He was driving a really good race up to that point. He was just, like you say, the innocent victim, as was Yuki Tsunoda, although Tsunoda wasn't really ever going to score points. I think he was just on for a mid-teens finish. That said, it was, again, poor driving from Kevin Magnussen. He's half-heartedly gone up the inside, and then he's not really backed out of the move. He's tried to force his way through, hoping that Tsunoda would give him space. That's not happened. It was like a half-hearted tackle in football, isn't it? If you're going to go in for a tackle, you go in full thunder and you take everything, even if you give away a free kick or something, maybe pick up a yellow card. But, Kevin is an experienced driver, but this was a clumsy mistake. And then we got to see Kevin and Lance actually race each other. It was fantastic. But, they'd already done the damage to two other drivers' races. And I felt really sorry for RB2, whatever they're called. Minardi, that's what I'm going to refer to them as because, I'm an old git, so it's fine. It's they've had a decent run where they're just on the fringes of points, and they could have had, a ninth or a 10th today in Ricardo's hands. He would have probably stopped again and put some softs on and been really fast. So I would think Ricardo would have stolen that final point, which I believe went to Nico Hulkenberg. So, yeah, it's really disappointing. And also for Aston Martin, Lance Stroll has cost himself some points. So, yeah, it's just not a good situation all around for anyone. But like you said, Owain, it's RB or VCarb are the innocent victims in all of this.
Yeah, yeah. It's been really sad, sort of, to see them have a sort of a bad day just because of other people's things, other people's issues. Sorry. We'll now move on to Sauber. I feel really bad actually because of a DNF by Valtteri Bottas, which obviously sort of kicked the race off into a bit more life. Joe is then therefore sort of been lumped in, which is a horrible thing to do on his first race and his home race. And obviously he was he was adored by the crowd, Jawad. But yeah, it was a fairly good race for the Saubers, sort of all things considered.
Yeah, all things considered, up until that unfortunate retirement for Bottas. And I was kind of reflecting on it afterwards that, while Ferrari power units overall have been a lot more reliable than they were, so like in, say, the early part of the hybrid era. It's always this team, Alfa Romeo and now Sauber, that always seems to bear the brunt of the reliability issues. So again, it was a suspected engine failure on Bottas's part. And yeah, in turn, it did kind of affect Joe's race as well. He did 3 stops ultimately to finish P14, but I think just lapping up, I guess, the experience for him, as much as scoring points would have been great and, he would have gone down in history for that. But I think just the whole experience, you kind of saw it on the after the race when he was allowed to pull up on the pit straight where the top 3 was, and the crowd cheering. Joe looked emotional as well. So, you could just see how much it meant to him, and particularly because China's been off the calendar for a few years now due to obvious reasons, and then conjecture even as to whether this will be the only Chinese Grand Prix that Guan Yu Zhou contests. So that's, I guess, a topic for another time. But, again, just kind of victim of where they're at in terms of car performance and whatnot. They looked solid in qualifying, as was the case with Bottas getting into the top 10. And then, I guess their Achilles heel this year has been pit stops. So, they were kind of saved in that they didn't lose points because of pit stops this time, but, hopefully they can do better next time.
Yeah, Sauber with relatively rapid pit stops of under 6 seconds. I won't keep harping on about it because it seems mean, but yeah, that's obviously not great, and you'd think it'd be an easier fix. Now we must sort of move across to a team that's not had sort of particularly good fortunes, just finished outside the points, and then Sargent obviously got the ignominy of a 10-second penalty for a really kind of not rookie mistake, but a mistake that the team should have been able to sort of help him not commit, Sophia. So, going out, what was it, a safety car infringement by coming out of the pits, I believe, ahead of Hulkenberg, or like passing him, even though he was behind at the safety car line, I believe, or the pit exit line, sorry.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting thinking about it. I was a little bit confused, and I think some of the commentary as well, because when they showed the replay, yeah, it was. I think they're going to obviously discuss it a bit more. To be fair, I think Williams might appeal. I guess maybe obviously they have spotters, so somebody should have at least told Sargent about it. But I mean, overall for Williams, it wasn't actually that bad of a race weekend for them as well. They didn't have much coverage. They had a few battles. I mean, the only time Alex Albon was really actually mentioned was about him complaining about Esteban Ocon in the beginning of the race, kind of moving all around on the track. But I mean, there was a few good battles. Albon finished P12, so just out of the points. As mentioned, obviously, that discussion that might come in the news in the next couple of weeks. But I think it was actually a decent Williams race. Like, both cars both finished. Wow. It's been a while since I've been on these shows. Both cars were able to finish. Obviously, with Sargent having the penalty, didn't really make much. You finished last. The time penalty didn't really care for. But, I mean, it obviously coming into Miami, they'll have their parts as well, because obviously that was a big worry as well, because they've been dreading these last couple of races with if there's any kind of accidents. Obviously they don't have as many parts as we saw in the previous races. So I think looking forward even to the next race in Miami, I think we could expect better improvements from Williams, I'm hoping. And to be fair, I think Alex Albon has some good chances to get some points in the next couple of races, because he has been kind of consistent with his overtakes and some really good defending throughout the entire race day.
Yeah, that's a good perspective on it. The one that I hadn't considered. What sort of the perspective that we didn't get really was for Alpine, Aaron. I barely saw any of them apart from a couple of on-track battles. That was a terrible segue. A couple of on-track battles. I don't think Gasly was too happy with Albon, and sort of Ocon we didn't really see much of, really.
Well, I can reveal that Alpine have had their best weekend of 2024. They have finished a fantastic 11th and 13th, which for a works team is objectively terrible. So let's put it all in perspective. They have had a terrible start to the season. They've brought a lighter chassis for Esteban Ocon, and it looks like it's worked because he's finished just on the fringes of the points. And this kind of adds credence to something that Sophia mentioned earlier, and the proposal to extend points down to P12. And I know in the Slack chat that we had, lots of differing opinions. Some people in favor of points for everybody, which, IndyCar does. They get points for finishing a race, but then other series will just, here's your points, and that's that. That's a whole different conversation. But, Alpine have made improvements. They've had their best weekend of the year. Previously, their best finish was 13th with Gasly in Australia. And then obviously in Japan 2 weeks ago, they were awful. So this is a step in the right direction. That said, this is a works team, but Renault don't really seem to want to fund it like a works team. They're trying to do everything on the cheap in the same way that historically French car manufacturers have entered Formula One. Think of Peugeot, and there was another one. Oh, it was Renault, wasn't it? Of course. I was thinking Citroën, but I was like, they've never been in Formula One. But, they just don't seem to grasp that you need to put your whole self in to get what you want out of it. So, this is fine, I suppose, for a midfield team. But if you're a works team, this is still just not good enough.
No, exactly. If you're a works team, you really have to go the whole hog. If only just not to look bad. You really have to put 100% effort in, and it almost seems clear that they're not, which is a shame. Speaking of other teams that have done things on the cheap, and honestly, they've got had an outsized impact on this race. Because if I go through my notes for this race, it is littered with the names of their drivers. It's Haas. It's they've managed to come out of the gone through the wars a bit, but they've managed to come out with a point out of it, with Nico Hülkenberg finishing in 10th place. But yeah, both Hülkenberg and Magnussen in the wars, Jawad, on the way to that, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. And commenting on the Magnussen move that ultimately took out Tsunoda, absolutely rookie move. I know Magnussen's the kind of driver who is very daring and does things. He goes on a Netflix and says things he's not afraid to die when he's racing. But what you guys said earlier, that's not the kind of move someone of his experience makes, and it was a very silly error that took him out of the race and or took him out of any sort of contention. He did get a 10-second time penalty, didn't he, and finish at the back of the field. But yeah, disappointed with that one, and it kind of makes the case that if Haas really want to be serious about their driver lineup moving forward, we all know that Ollie Behrman's in contention for a seat there. If Nico Hülkenberg doesn't go anywhere else, then I would be saying sayonara to Magnussen. But on Nico, great job again. Yes, there was that thing that he was investigated with, I think it was with Sargent, the pit exit, and Sargent copped a penalty for that, which was really weird, even though he was coming out of the pit. So I don't know how it can be seen as an overtake. Anyway, for them to score a point, even though they started P9, great result. It does kind of prove that Haas this year aren't going as backwards as they usually did in the past in the races where they had the awful time management issues. So, to be sitting where they are at the moment, championship wise, it's pretty good, and looks better for Hulkenberg as well, as I'm sure Audi are constantly on the phone with him trying to negotiate a contract for the future.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure if I would hire Nico Hülkenberg if I were Audi, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, a team that I think has kind of pulled a bit of a blinder out of a honestly a really bad situation for them have been Mercedes sphere. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton started 18th, I believe. I believe that George Russell started, was it 8th? And they've actually managed to get a decent points out of it, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Russell first. Like, obviously, he had the great start when lights went out, moving up 2 places ahead of the Ferrari, and obviously finishing P6. He was kind of in no man's land throughout the race. Like, there wasn't much battling for him. He was either so far away from the driver in front of him, but then also so far ahead of the driver behind him. He actually finished 5 seconds, around about 5 seconds behind Sainz, and then ahead of Alonso. So he was just kind of stuck and like it was just a clean kind of racing for him. I think obviously when there was restarts, there was some good battling that we saw because obviously they are bunched up at the start, but he was just kind of just chilling, and it was a good kind of race. There wasn't any issues with tires or strategy from what I could hear from the radio. However, moving over to Hamilton, I feel like I might get cancelled with some of the things I'm going to say, but like he was able to obviously finish in the points, but I don't know. There's something throughout this weekend. He's just been very checked out. He's been giving I like to say excuses about different car setups. Obviously, because they've changed how sprint race weekends are. It used to be you and Park Ferme from Friday. Obviously, now you can do 2 different setups. He keeps on comparing himself to George, and I know people do not like Nico Rosberg, but like some of the comments that was made actually made a lot of sense. Like he was very much comparing himself negatively to George, saying the car is better suited to George. It's a different setup, but we've heard this so many times, and it's just like I just don't understand it. And he was even joking at the end of qualifying about how bad that qualifying is. Like with his knowledge and skills as well, to leave a 1 lap attempt right at the end. Like I don't understand his thoughts about that. And then obviously throughout the race, he was talking about his tires. He was talking about the wrong calls for the strategies, the pit stops. I mean, his team did really good pit stops. They were, I think the worst one was like a 2.8 for Hamilton. So like they were good pit stops, but I don't know. It's just surprising to see he was able to get points, but that's the great thing as well. Like moving from P18 to P9, not even P10, he was able to secure the 2 points. And there was some really good battling with Zhou and Nico, and then also towards the end with Piastri, even when Piastri had damage. So I think it was good racing, but there's something about me that feels like he's very checked out now, especially, I don't know, obviously, because obviously he's moving to Ferrari next year. Obviously, he's trying to think of his future, but for some reason, I've just kind of lost my interest in watching Hamilton because even just like his post-race interviews and all that, it just seems comical, some of the things that he says, or like he should put more effort in and more emphasis, and I don't know, it just feels very weird, and I might get canceled for it. I do apologize, but yeah, it's just an interesting one. So hopefully as well, Miami will have new upgrades for the Mercedes, which has been a track that's not been their favorite due to porpoising. So I'm excited to see what those upgrades will be, but hopefully they can actually get back on track and start battling with the Ferraris, the Aston Martins, and the McLarens starting from round 6.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a little bit weird. Maybe we're seeing a little bit of, no, I wouldn't say regression from Lewis because, he's a 7-time world champion, but but maybe sort of a disconcerting sort of attitude that we're seeing from Lewis. Aaron, do you have a sort of counterpoint to that?
I do. I mean, I think what we have to bear in mind here, everything you've said is true and correct, Sophia. So I'm not going to dispute that. I think what we have to sort of categorize this is the most successful driver in the sport's history, and he is driving a rubbish truck. He is driving with a caravan towed to the back of his car. This is not what he signed up for. He deals in winning races and challenging the very best. And at the moment, he's just not able to do that. And for someone who, okay, he's been very privileged to have the best cars over the years. And, some people will see it as whining and things like that. But you've got to remember, he is in this sport to win. He's not here just to take part. He wants to win. This is part of his reasoning to go to Ferrari because they've got a better car. That's almost the entire decision made for him. They have a better car. They will give him a chance to win more races. Who knows what's going to happen with the 2026 rules? They might change. Mercedes suddenly are back at the front and he looks a bit silly. But right now, he wants to put himself in a position where he can win because he knows time is running out. And that's what he's here to do. He's not here to finish 9th. he's here to win races.
Can I counter that? Because comparing to George, though, that's the thing. Like, this is showing, yes, Lewis is the greatest of all time. Like, he is a 7-time world champion. But the thing is that it shouldn't be very heavily reliant on the car. Again, it goes back to, is it the driver or the car, the skills? If you compare him as well to how George is doing so far, George is ahead of him in the constructors. He's finished above Lewis 5 out, like, all of these rounds so far. So, like, I understand your reasoning behind it, but as well, this is the time where Lewis would be like, right, I'm a 7-time world champion. I need to get my butt in gear and push, even though it's a bad car, because look at my teammate. It's the same kind of conversation we have with Max, the same with Checo as well. It's that kind of conversation, which again goes back to, is it the car? Is it the driver? I do agree, but I don't know, maybe jumping ship and he's kind of checked out too early as well.
There is that to sort of look at. He's comparing himself to George. It's almost sort of deflection tactics, isn't it, in the media? Oh, it's not my fault. The car isn't quite set up the way I want it to. But we all know he made a mistake. It was very clear, very obvious. There's no escaping that. So, yeah, I didn't quite get his reasoning for pointing that out. But I think with Lewis, we will see when he gets into a winning position, he raises his game. We saw it in the sprint. He was at the front. He knows what to do when he's there, and he finished second. So it's not like he's lost his talent. It's just, yeah, he's not bothered about fighting for ninth, is he? Let's be honest. Mercedes as a team don't want to fight for ninth. They want to fight for first. So they're all winners in that sense. That's why you see Toto Wolff looking so grumpy and miserable all the time. So yeah, at least he's got his nice lifestyle to go back to in Monaco. I suppose that'll cheer him up.
I would also like to posit that Lewis was also in for almost the first time in his career that he's leaving a team and he's made the decision early enough that he's got a year in the car, and maybe he's just feeling the effects of the team moving away from him and slowly shutting down from him, because obviously he's not going to be there. So and they're very clearly in a move to the future. That's maybe that could maybe explain the sort of the vibes that he's giving off. And speaking of vibes, only good vibes at Aston Martin, but still they're just I don't know about you, Aaron, but my read on them is that they went backwards this entire race. Where am I seeing this? Am I seeing the right thing, or what do you have to say maybe towards that?
No, I'd agree with that. I think they are the 5th fastest car. I think Alonso is doing these little bits of magic in qualifying to get that car into places where it really doesn't deserve to be. You look at it's kind of the opposite between Aston Martin and Mercedes. You've got the Mercedes, which is really good on its long run pace, generally, like in comparison. But one lap pace, the drivers just aren't able to access that performance when they're not making mistakes. But with Alonso, he's able to draw all of that performance out. He put that car 3rd on the grid. He put it 3rd. And that Aston Martin was nowhere near even the 2nd fastest car this weekend at any point. And yet there's Alonso in 3rd. Look, Alonso, I have a love-hate relationship with him. He is a fantastic driver, but he just does my head in with some of the things he does and says, and the way he behaves at times. It just, but that's also what makes him such a fascinating character. And he's great for the sport. I mean, I know Eddie Jordan has been on a podcast recently saying that the older drivers need to move on because they're blocking up the way for young talent. And that is partially true. But when you've got Alonso sort of doing bits of magic like this, and then it just says, he should be here fighting with the top drivers. He's still got it. That said, Aston Martin almost threw it all down the toilet, didn't they, with the strategy? It kind of came back to them. But by that point, Alonso was their only hope because Lance Stroll in the other car made a mistake. Ironically, as I mentioned before, kind of Alonso's making. So with Aston Martin, they're in this weird situation where they're able to qualify really well, but they're kind of turning into Haas last year where they just slowly slide backwards. And Alonso's doing everything he can to slide as few spots back as possible. And, to pick up, what was it, 7th today by the flag? Let me just check the results. It was P7. He got the fastest lap as well. So, they got their strategy kind of right in the end. But I suppose if they'd I don't know if they had another set of hards. They could have maybe finished fifth ahead of Sainz, so they kind of lost a couple of positions there. It wasn't particularly brilliant strategy. Obviously, there's question marks over the second driver. Is Lance Stroll really good enough to compete at the sharp end of Formula One? He's getting shown up at the moment because, really the top five teams should be finishing first to 10th if they all finish. And yet Lance Stroll isn't doing that. Aston Martin are 12 points behind Mercedes, and you can lay all of those 12 points at the door of Lance Stroll, really. Look, I think Lance is a capable F1 driver, but I think there are, especially in Formula 2 and in F1 at the moment, there are better drivers in worse cars that would do a better job in the Aston Martin. Look at the performance of Ollie Behrman. If you put him in that Aston Martin alongside Fernando Alonso, they will score a heck of a lot of points and they'll do it really quickly. But, this is what happens when your dad owns the team. You're going to be safe in that seat. Is there enough fire underneath Lance to make him pull it out? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so it's almost like a comedian playing to a non-neutral audience. Obviously, they're going to get worse. I mean, when you know that you're not going to get kicked out of the team unless you do something really stupid, then I guess that maybe has an impact on how good your driving is. And I'm glad you sort of mentioned the way that Alonso's season is going, because he's kind of doing a reverse 2012 Ferrari, where he was instead of qualifying poorly and making up positions in the race, he's qualifying well and not making up positions in the race, and instead regressing. And speaking of Ferrari, Jawad, what happened to them this weekend? A fourth and fifth qualified in fourth and fifth, and absolutely, I in the nicest way possible, I'm seeing sort of the gremlins of strategy of years past coming back.
I think I have to agree with that one. Yeah, especially today in the full distance race, it did look a bit shaky at times when it came to some of the team radio calls. We might go to Plan D was one of the calls, and just when you hear phrases like that, or we are checking you, your anxiety suddenly peaks because you know that Ferrari are going to make a mistake here. And look, I think overall they just lacked pace compared to the McLaren. I know McLaren kind of came in and said, "Oh, we peaked in qualifying. I don't think we've got more in it." But we saw with the result that one of the McLarens were much quicker than both Ferraris today. So I think Leclerc's race was kind of saved by the VSC coming out and him being able to pit then. It's just unfortunate that McLaren reacted in time to be able to put Norris in and pit him under the VSC as well. And then, of course, we had the two safety cars that followed. So, yeah, I guess they were just showing up on pace overall to stay in the top three contention. Love all the meme-worthy content being put into the chat at the moment. And yeah, as Aaron says, Ferrari are a bit of a meme, but the hope is that they don't just stay as a meme, because we want to see this team fighting at the front and winning races and championships. Even me as a non-Ferrari fan, I still think it's been way too long and something's got to give. So hopefully with seven-time world champion next year, that can be the case. But I guess it's a bit of an expectation check too this weekend, because looking at the Constructor Championship standings, Ferrari is safe in P2 at the moment. Yes, they were close to Red Bull after the first couple of races and they did take a win. So the fact that, they're going to be fighting themselves essentially for P2 in the championship this year, unless, McLaren can step it up as well and reach that point that they are. Ferrari are going to have weekends like this where double top five finish is what they're going to have to take, particularly considering those teams behind Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, on any given weekend can be at the head of that queue. So, yes, disappointing, but then also an expectation check, I guess, for Ferrari this weekend. So that's how I would categorize it. And interesting to point out too with the driver points is that even though Sainz missed a race, he's 7 points behind Leclerc in the championship. So that's pretty incredible considering, he had a big fat zero coming out of Saudi. And this is the first weekend that he hasn't finished on the podium as well, which is a stat that gets brought up often. So, not doing a bad job, even though things did get a little heated in the sprint yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to read about because they're brilliant. But Plan D meaning damage limitations, and Plan D meaning don't know what we're doing. Absolutely brilliant from our panelists. Yeah. So honestly, it's as you say, it's been pretty bad for Ferrari. And on the flip side of we've got McLaren Sophia, who I mean, we're having a great race up until someone got rear-ended, and honestly, it looked like the lack of pace, at least this time in this race, wasn't their fault.
Yeah, it was a good weekend, I think, so far. I mean, Norris had it even said on screen how had he done a second pit, he would have finished P3. So I think obviously going against what his engineers were originally suggesting throughout the race, I think was a great call for him as a driver. It's something that we should see in some drivers regularly. I mean, I've mentioned it about Charles a few times last season, where he kind of goes with the engineer, but not actually kind of taking his own kind of opinion and knowledge into a race as well. So it was really good to see. I think one of the interesting ones was about the pit situation with Lando. I think they could have chanced it. Instead of going an extra lap. However, because we were going to get a safety car and another safety car, I think it was just damage limitations for it. But had there not been an additional safety car, I think Lando probably would have been off at the podium. So I think it was a good call for them to come in on that second lap. Which, yeah, it was kind of an interesting one to see. But I mean, Piastri, he did very well, given the fact that he had suffered some pretty extensive damage by the sounds of it from that hit with Daniel Ricciardo. And there was some good times of some good battling as well. I think he was battling with Lewis a few times, getting very close to Piastri's gearbox and everything. And while both drivers on the points, I kind of wish we were looking for a little bit more. Obviously, we were having high hopes for the sprint yesterday for Norris. I know I was, as a not-so-secret McLaren fan. But, I mean, he was able to get the podium that he probably should have gotten yesterday in the sprint. So I'm excited. I think even looking at post-race interviews, like Andreas was very surprised because they were coming in this weekend saying that it's not a track that they should be really good at. They were very worried about some of the corners and just overall they were kind of not expecting to do as well as they did. I'm happy that both of them got points. I think Piastri, had it not been for the damage, probably would have moved up a little bit higher in the finish line, and it'll be great points for them for when they're battling against the Ferraris and the Aston Martins for this season. So it'll be exciting to see how Miami shapes up as well. I don't think they have upgrades, but who knows as well. There might be some change between now and then if upgrades will be sent for the McLaren. But really good. Love to see Lando on podium again. However, still no win. I'm hoping this season we will get a Lando win at some point, because he is now, I think he actually surpasses the record now for the most podiums with no race wins as well. So it's not a stat you want to have, especially in his kind of early-ish years in F1. And it was his first time, well, both drivers racing in China as well, because both of them have not really been on for it or finishing, I know, for Lando. So should be all good, but I'm excited to see how Miami goes. But really good day for the McLaren with double points.
Yeah, he's creeping up. I think he's got 14, maybe 15 podiums without an F1 race win, which is that's not a record you want to have. Now, someone a team that's breaking records really is Red Bull, Aaron. Absolutely impervious, really. I mean, like I mentioned at the top of the show, the only thing that they haven't done this weekend is a 1-2. Yeah, it's has it not been a masterful performance from them?
Yeah, the only thing that could have possibly tripped them up was a little bit of rain, and we got that for SQ3 on Friday, and that was the only time where suddenly the Red Bull looked a bit average because it couldn't generate any tyre temperature. But the rain went away and it didn't come back, and yeah, it was the inevitable, really, wasn't it? In the sprint, Verstappen came through in the end, despite his battery being flat at some point, and then he just cruised to a comfortable sprint win. Did the same today, didn't he? Just it's so effortlessly easy for them to just dominate races. I mean, Mercedes have had it, Ferrari have had it, McLaren have had it in years gone by, Williams too at their heyday. So it happens, and when you're part of that team, if you're a supporter of Red Bull and Max Verstappen, enjoy it, because as a Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes fan, it can disappear very quickly, and suddenly your world feels very, very dark. So yeah, enjoy the good times while they're here, because you never know how long they're going to last. It's a thing that Sebastian Vettel said, isn't it, at the end of 2013? Always remember these days because they could go away very quickly. And Red Bull are absolutely right to enjoy their success because they are absolutely dominant. That car just doesn't seem to be able to do anything other than go very fast on a racetrack. It just speaks to the genius of Adrian Newey, doesn't it? But you also need a really good driver to do it, because if you look at the way Verstappen destroys the opposition, if he wasn't there and it was Perez leading the charge, they'd probably be successful, but they wouldn't be anywhere near as dominant. Let's face it, Perez got beaten by Lando Norris today on a different strategy in a slower car. So that obviously speaks to Lando's quality, and it kind of shows you that Perez is lacking a little bit of something. So, I don't mean to knock Perez, but that's just a situation that we've got this season, that what we've got today. Obviously, he's finished second to Max in the other 3 races that Red Bull have won, and that's his job, is to back up Verstappen, basically lock out the top 2 spots. If this is something that becomes a bit more of a trend with Perez, like it did last year, where his performances tailed off, then, that spectre of Carlos Sainz into the second Red Bull seat just looms larger and larger and larger. And honestly, I think Sainz in the second Red Bull would be fantastic. He is absolutely good enough to push Verstappen every inch of the way. I think he's he's an upgrade on Perez, and then there's a bit of history there, a score to be settled. So that would be mighty interesting. My hope is that Red Bull do something kind of exciting with their driver lineup to just give us something, because we can't have another year of Verstappen just out front winning all the time. And look, the best of the Mercedes years, when they were truly dominant, were those first 3 years where they had Hamilton and Rosberg just at each other's throats. It was pure theatre. And if Red Bull can give us something like that, I think they'd actually win a few fans for it. But, they've also got to do what's best for their team. So I'll let them decide on the drivers, and we'll just have to congratulate them on a thoroughly good job well done.
Yeah, maybe in a few years, Spanish TV will hear the kind of spice that we've been hearing off Nico Rosberg for the last weekend at least, and before that. So that wraps up our 10 teams, our 20 drivers. But I want you guys to pick your driver of the day. If I go back to you, Aaron, who is your driver of the day?
So in our Slack chat, I voted for Lewis Hamilton, because apparently driver of the day is based on who moves the furthest amount of spaces forward from their grid slot, and Lewis halved his grid position, so therefore he did the best job, really. But no, I mean, honestly, you could give it to Verstappen because he dominated the field, but I'm going to give it to Nico Hülkenberg because he is driving so well right now. He's showing his class. In an alternate universe where he ends up at Mercedes in 2013, he's a multiple race winner, possibly a world champion. He's really showing that he has got everything. I know you said you wouldn't take him at Audi, but they could do a lot worse. Let's be honest, Hülkenberg did a brilliant job today. That Haas, probably not quite the 5th best car. Shouldn't have scored a point, in my opinion, but he did. So fantastic from him.
Jawad, who is your driver of the day?
So I did end up going with Lando Norris. McLaren he bottled it in the sprint race yesterday, so I think it's a great way for him to rebound, and also particularly on a weekend when McLaren weren't really rated to be second quickest compared to the Red Bulls. So another great effort from him, and he's got to get the monkey that is the win off his back sometime soon, and I really hope that it is this year. And quickly on Lewis Hamilton as well, I absolutely agree with Aaron's choice to put him driver of the day, but also prove that their motivation is still there to get a result. Like if Hamilton truly had checked out and didn't care about the rest of the season, he could have just parked up and caught the early flight out of there. But what I saw in the sprint race too yesterday with him when he was in the lead, by the time he gave up or had to give up the lead to Verstappen, it was because he was hamstrung by his machinery, which is something we don't usually get. But the talent is very much still there, and yeah, he put in a good drive too today.
Yeah, obviously it's still there, but I think he's maybe more efficient with his effort. I think it's the nicest way to that's maybe the way to put it. Where you gave him one sniff of a P2 and he just ran Norris out to the outside, and that was it. And Sophia, who's your driver of the day?
My driver of the day is actually Fernando Alonso. I also said it in the Slack. I think he did very well given obviously the safety cars. But I mean, opening like that first corner to overtake, that is probably one of the best clips I've seen in a while. And I think that is a good like overtake of the month kind of submission. But his battling throughout, obviously, yes, he did not finish where he started. However, he was almost going to go for a full stint on the start on the softs. It looked like as well. Like he was doing very well, and I think there was some really good battles, some really good overtaking, the defending as well throughout the race that Alonso did. I think it was deserving of driver of the day, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It reminds me, I think of was it Kimi Räikkönen in the Lotus from a few years ago, right round the outside of turn one. Honestly, I asked Perez, "What were you doing?" You're like, that was a door easily that was easily swung closed, and you didn't even try. But yeah, great picks, and I'm gonna, what, my driver, I'm gonna go with Piastri because it's really, obviously these cars go a lot. Well, they require a lot of rear downforce. That's where it all comes from, and his race was absolutely, it was sort of curtailed a bit short by obviously that damage that he received. Obviously not as bad as Ricciardo, but still, the fact that he managed to keep it in the points and ahead of some drivers who were faster is quite impressive. So those are our drivers of the day, and I'll just give you guys the opportunity to promo what you want. So Aaron, where can we find you? What if we want more of your content?
So I'm from AXGP, which is an F1 manager gaming channel. So we take teams and we do challenges and we just have a little bit of fun. My current save is with Haas. So I might have been slightly biased in my pick with driver of the day with Nico Hulkenberg because he's doing magic bits for me right now. He's actually got a podium at Silverstone in this save. So it's definitely an alternate universe. But we also do a challenge with McLaren where we've got no upgrades until Austria. We're now allowed to upgrade. So we're doing that live on stream. And there'll be plenty more to come when F1 Manager 24 comes out. So you can find that on YouTube and see you in a stream or in a video soon.
Yeah, you should absolutely catch that. Jawad, where can we find you? Where can we find your writings?
Yeah, website here called theraw.com.au/motorsport. You'll find that I do all the live blogs for each F1 race, not the sprints. So I'm kind of relishing the fact that we've had 5 races so far this season at decent times for people on this side of the world. So now comes the American and European races, which is going to mean lots of coffee and staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning. So fun, but I've been doing it for 10 years now and it's still good fun.
Excellent. You're a real trooper staying up to 2 a.m. I didn't bother. Now, Sophia, you are the co-host of Formula Talk. Where can we find that?
Yep, so we are back for our second season. I'm joined by another Good Talk and Formula Talk co-host Tom Downey. You can find us on YouTube. We have our separate channel this season at Formula Talk. You can also we talk about everything that's non-F1, so looking at Formula 2, Formula 3, F1 Academy. We're going to be previewing the F1 Academy Miami show soon as well, and some other kind of race news as well. You can also find me at everythingf1.com, where I do articles on Formula 2 and Formula 3 as well when racing takes place.
Yeah, it was quite a shame not to have a Formula 2 or Formula 3 weekend here. I was actually kind of sad about it. But apart from that, if you'd like to sort of keep up with the show, make sure you follow at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media platforms with the app. That's where you'll be able to keep up to date with the show. And Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes like this one are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify. You'll have to go to YouTube Music if you're still using Google Podcasts, as I believe it got shut down on the 2nd of April. It's still limping along, but there's some options there to transfer over to a new podcast platform. Should you wish. So, make use of them. Keep following us. Keep listening. Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to qualifying and the race results. And please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so that we can get mics, lights, and better recording equipment. And as I said, like with the social media, but also with the YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. We will be back soon with plenty of more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye.
Recording.
They've moved the record button since they've moved the stop record button. You just see my face get gradually more concerned as I'm just like, where is it? It's not in the bottom row.
It's gone.
It's moved. What's going on? It's like trying to find a Facebook draft on the mobile app. That was quite difficult earlier. Gosh. Right, so we'll just go into the post show. There's a little bit of chatter in the chat. I think you guys some people have definitely been talking about it. Louis Edwards is there. That's a bit late for you, really. So it's moving a bit late for you, Louis. And Sophia, you've been in there too. Holly Callum. Just see if there's any sort of questions or anything that we were trying to talk about. Yeah, Louis agreeing with you about how Louis agreeing with you, Aaron, about how Lewis isn't happy right now because he's not competitive, and that's how it goes.
It's to be expected, though, isn't it? Because he's a winner at the end of the day, and that's what he's dined out on for the last 18 years. He's had up until 2022, he'd had one bad car, which McLaren had actually turned into a race winner halfway through the year. So it wasn't up until the last couple of years, he's not actually really dealt with a car that's been this difficult for this long of a time, and naturally that's going to wane on your sort of motivation. But yeah, he's made his decision. He's decided to go to Ferrari, so he'll have to live with that. If he never wins another race because Ferrari keep dropping the ball on strategy, that's on him.
I was going to say he's going to a team that also hasn't won a championship for a very long time, which is the period that Mercedes are finding themselves in after such sustained success. But yeah, it's just said it, I think, on a show once before recently too, that it's just very puzzling to see how they sustain that success across such a long period of time, nearly a decade, eight constructors championships consecutively, and all of a sudden it's just, poof, overnight. I'm sure there's so many other factors that go into it and whatnot, but a team that sustains success for that long, the higher they rise, the harder they fall.
It is exactly that. I mean, it's so bizarre, isn't it? But like I said, the good days can just vanish in an instant. We saw it with Red Bull from 2013 to 2024 to 2014. They won 9 races in a row, and then they turned up in Australia, and they weren't even sure if the car was going to start. That was mostly the Renault power unit, but also the Red Bull car wasn't quite as strong on the chassis side as the Mercedes, and Mercedes let everyone think it was just the engine, so they just developed it. It was clever from them, but it is the swings and roundabouts of sport. It's the way it goes. And
I think that sometimes it's also is how it works out. I mean, even if the Mercedes chassis in 2014 hadn't been as good, that engine was so good, it meant that they got to not have to worry about the engine and not have to have an amazing chassis, and they got to sort of build that up while it was hidden by the chassis. And then we got to obviously sort of 2017, 2018, all the way towards, even up to 2021. And 2021 was the only point that, a team without, an illegally fast engine, a legally powerful engine even got to do that. So
I think what you have to remember as well is in 2017 and 2018, Mercedes weren't hands down the fastest car. Ferrari were at points clearly ahead, and it was Ferrari dropping the ball. It was Mercedes staying calm and not making a mess of things that won them those two championships. The irony is that Ferrari had this illegal engine and it spawned possibly the greatest car of all time in terms of like performance in the W11.
Yeah.
Obviously, the last year's Red Bull and this year's Red Bull would probably have something to say about that. But the W11 was based on a concept that Ferrari were going to be absolutely insanely fast. And then they were nowhere. So Mercedes just had they were like, oh, yeah, we've got this really fast car, and where's everybody else?
Yeah, and if we had got a proper, a full non-COVID affected season in 2020 as well, with 21 or 22 races as was planned, who's not knowing how many races would they have won more in that season? So, yeah, just still get flashbacks to the DAS, the dual axis steering, and the levels or the limits that they had to go to make sure that they'd be on top of Ferrari for that season because of that illegal engine. So yeah, it's great looking back at that.
It's almost like a mini shot in the arm. You see a lot with how obviously sport is cyclical, and you have to put this massive effort into overcoming, the advantage of the dominant team at the time, and then once you get to that point and they falter or whatever, or they come behind, and then you have this big period of time where you're ahead, but obviously you can only sustain that so long. Liverpool, for example, are a good example of that. And then obviously, but you get brain drained off that. I think that's happening to Mercedes a lot now. Is that they're having engineers be pilfered left, right, and centre. But maybe that 2017, 2018 Ferrari was the shot in the arm to give them the extra motivation to keep going and push even harder, as you say, and do that. So,
well, look at what happened to Red Bull in those years. They fell off. Their chassis sort of dropped. Newey's interest waned. He was building boats or whatever, and he'll bring out a book about that, I'm sure.
Well, there's a couple of Aston Martins that bear. I'll put it this way, honestly. Aston Martin have pulled a blinder, bearing in mind that they're about to go back to the top class of endurance racing with an Adrian Newey derived car, which is.
It doesn't win.
I mean, it's BOP'd, so it's going to come down a lot to operationally as well, but I'll put it this way: they've got an advantage in that they've got a detuned engine because there's a horsepower limit on that, and then so they should have better reliability, and then they've got a fairly decent team, Heart of Racing, who's pretty good.
You've strayed into endurance racing there. We're all lost.
Oh, you know what? The best in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, the 6 hours of Imola starts.
Literally got my remote ready for that because it's going to be an interesting one to see with who's taking polls and everything. So
I didn't see the qualifying session, but it's nice to see other cars going around Imola. They're nice and chunky. It's great.
Love what they've done with
one cars are chunky, too chunky.
Yeah, but with the endurance cars, it's better because they can.
What's this?
Have you seen an endurance car?
Wings.
No, because it's just look at every endurance racer head on, and you would just see it's just there's the cockpit, and then you've got front wings.
Can we clip
the wheel arches over the tires? Just
wings.
Hold it a little bit longer.
It's it'll be the George Russell meme for Grid Talk, basically.
Anyway, no, it's good. What do you mean you don't want bug-eyed prototypes? Anyway, right. One thing I did want to talk about. Sorry, carry on, Jawad.
No, I was going to say that's what the Panos was back, whatever year that they were in top flight endurance racing.
Oh, like the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah.
Oh goodness! I was going to say one thing Sophia brought up, which is the P12 points. I'm against it. You know what? You should have to fight for points.
I totally agree, but also the fact that the reliability is so strong nowadays. Okay, today we saw 3 retirements, but only one of them was a mechanical failure. Back in sort of 25 years ago, in the 90s, mechanical failures were a lot more common, even though the points only went down to P6. Then reliability got better, and in 2003 they expanded it to the top 8. And because in 2010 they had 3 new teams join the grid, they said, okay, well, top 10, because then it's sort of proportional. And they haven't changed it, even though we've reduced it to 20 cars. So in theory, actually, we should be talking about reducing it to the top 8 to make the points more valuable. That said, a great drive today from Ocon gets no reward. So, I mean, it's tricky. I looked at the championship. I don't like seeing zeros there. Like if you fail to finish because you have an accident or your car breaks down, you should be punished with that, but for that, with no points. I think there is a way of giving everyone points. I'd kind of like to go either you make them super valuable, really hard to get, or you give points to everyone based on the fact that most teams finish most races now. You get 17, 18 cars finish a race. So it is a fine balance. Going to 12th, I mean, you might as well just go everybody by that stage, or you go the other way and reduce the amount of points available.
It could be also like potentially that they're doing it till 12 and then maybe follow IndyCar as well. Because obviously jumping from 10 to 20 or how many that finish, that's also a big jump as well. So it could be that it's a stepping stone for it. I agree. I actually like the idea of it going to P12 because there was, as we've mentioned as well, there's been so many good battles and it's confusing for fans as well to be like, why 3 drivers all have 0 points? Why is one ahead of the other? And like, it's kind of confusing to explain to some fans as well to understand it. So I agree that we should make the points more valuable, but at the same time, they should be also more accessible. It's a catch-22. Like no one's gonna like one side's not gonna like it, no matter what side you go to. I think because the midfield pack is Verstappen's just in his own kind of world. Let's be honest, 13 seconds ahead today, same as yesterday. So like from P2 down, like that is competitive. Like especially these mid teams, if you look at Sauber, Kick, or whatever, like they did very well up until Bottas's retirement. Like there was good opportunities that Zhou Guanyu could have got points. Look at Alpine, look at Haas even as well. It makes the bottom half more competitive because while we're watching the battles, there's no outcomes. Like you see today that they were battling for 15, 16, 14, or whatever. Had maybe you've been battling for 12 for points, it would be making more interesting as well and makes sense, and especially when you look at the standings, because like you can't have more than 4 drivers with 0 points. That does not look nice in regards to how the sport is as well, and it's confusing for people to understand why Sargent's at the bottom compared to Zhou with 0 points. Like if they have 0 points, what's the difference? Because it's not alphabetical order, so that's like, so what's the case then?
I mean, we really enjoyed that fight between Stroll and Magnussen after they both
Mm-hmm.
pitted and had their various incidents. I mean, wouldn't it have been great if that, even though it was for 17th, if it meant something? Like, actually, they're scrapping over last, but actually the person who finishes ahead gets a bonus point or whatever. It then adds value to every single position gained. But also, if you're not gonna make points during the Grand Prix more accessible, at least make them more accessible for the lower teams in the sprints by reversing the grid and saving
Yes.
the sprint qualifying. I mean, it's just another session at the end, isn't it? I would, as I said this in our Slack, I would give the teams a little bit more testing. And I think, was it Owain, you said scale it on the championship order? Someone said about scaling it on
I don't think it was
championship
me.
order, like
No,
the
no,
wind
that
tunnel
seems far too intelligent for me.
time. So yeah, if you scale it on that, and then you had only one practice session, then you reverse the sprint grid for like championship order, you'd get great racing. You'd get convergence of the grid, and then hopefully Mercedes would get it right and Ferrari would get it right eventually, but who even knows? But you would then also be compensating the teams that are lower down the order. You give them the opportunity to actually be at the front. They've got to find a way of staying in the lead. Do they put softs on and go for it? Do they go with mediums? You might see some of the faster cars decide actually it's going to be tricky to get through. We want the extra grippy tires and we're going to try and come through. They've also got to balance, how much risk do we take? Damage. There's so many things they can do, and they're just not. They're pandering to the teams too much. F1 and the FIA need to actually say, we are the rule makers. You do this, or you decide you're doing something else. and we'll just carry on without you because the sport will grow without the teams.
Agree with the reverse, but I wouldn't even say like the whole grid because imagine Logan Sargent in P1. Let's be honest.
I'm here for that.
Like, no, but like I'm just thinking of the carnage, because like they're not used to it, and I think also especially when there's such a limit on what's available for like replacement parts as well and the cost as well. I agree with the reverse. I think it should be F2, F3 style, top 10, top 8, top 10, top 12. I think it should be that style instead.
But then you're still getting the same teams in the same
potentially,
same
but that bottom, it's that bottom like last 3 points positions could with the reverse. I think it's kind of a good one to see. I can't see the whole grid reversing. I can see half maybe.
I think that's where they'll start, and then they'll go. Actually, yeah, if they ever did it, they'd then do the whole grid, and they should do that because, I mean, as much as I said that Red Bull are doing a great job, it is a bit dull, and it was the same in the Mercedes era, seeing the same teams at the front. Like in the sprint yesterday, we actually had a bit of a mixture. We had at one point, I think it was 3 different teams in the top 3 spots. We don't have that very often at the moment, do we?
First person in P4 to ever win a sprint race as well, or podium.
So you turn it around, and suddenly, yeah, okay, Logan Sargent's on the front row with Zhou Guanyu next to him. Actually, that's a really good story. One of them is going to have an amazing day because they're either they might end up crashing at turn 1, but it would actually give you it would give people a reason to tune in because actually Verstappen's at the back. If he wins, that's the story. But if someone else wins, it's like, that's actually really important points for them, but they're not necessarily going to get. So it's so important that they think about this carefully. How accessible do they make these points during the Grand Prix? Maybe P12 is the answer. Maybe everyone who finishes gets a point outside of the top 10, and you make those top 10 points a little bit bigger and juicier for the people who do finish in those positions. Or you do something with the sprint and offer something up there.
On the flip side, with the reverse as well, it might also make teams try to perform not as well, though, as well. That's why, if they're doing 2 qualifyings, for example, as well, that doesn't make sense.
It should be 2 qualifyings.
It should be 1. Yeah,
order.
Yeah. It will give time as well on the track, especially tracks like China. Obviously, we've not been for 5 years. Some of these drivers have never been on it. Obviously, sims can only do so much. Obviously, weather was a big issue. Obviously, as we saw early on in the weekend, but it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of stepping stones in the sport of F1 now regarding to sprints, regarding to points, regarding to even just components as well. Obviously, going into this new era in 2026, I think there's a lot changing from that onwards. And it's just they can't do everything at once as well. That's the issue because fans will probably have an absolute riot to think about. So there's some
going to be gradual.
Yeah, but how gradual though as well?
Well, start from Miami. That'll do.
Oh, it's sprint weekend there as well.
Yep.
I'd like to add to that. So, following the Australian V8 Supercar Championship, they pay points down to the last classified finisher, and at no point do I ever hear any complaints about that. It's still very much a meritocracy system. So whoever finishes higher in the championship will get the more prize money, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that would change much. The thing is, we're still going to look at a top 10 finish as a top 10 finish. You finish in the top half of the grid, even if, the bottom half is going to get a few points here or there. It does then, put more jeopardy on a non-finish if you do pay points down to, so say you got 25 points or 30 points being winner down to 1 point for P19, whatever it is, it still puts more jeopardy, I think, on a non-finish or a DNF, or when teams will retire a car on mechanical grounds because they had an incident or something like that. So it puts more emphasis on keeping cars out there and getting to the end of the race or being a classified finisher. I think, talking in relevance to what they're proposing with points down to P12. I mean, I don't think that works for 20 cars. Like you said, Aaron, in 2010, when they brought in 3 new teams and we had a grid of 24 cars, it was relevant to push the points out to the top 10. So if we had another team on the grid, then I would say, yes, top 11 cars or 12 cars should get points. But because apparently having another team on the grid doesn't bring value to the sport, I don't think it would also bring equal value having points down to P12. But if we did it, across the entire field, then, that's a different proposition.
And bear in mind, every point does mean some sort of financial gain, because sponsors will have targets. So if you get that participation point, and then they all add up. So, if a team is unreliable, they will get found out. If you have a bad pit stop, you will get punished. Okay, everyone 11th down gets 1 point, but still finishing 11th could still be crucial, because you still actually, if it's a tiebreaker, it will be done on countback, won't it? And when those crazy days are available for you to score in the top 10 and get more points, they're still super valuable because they give you a bigger boost. I mean, it doesn't matter in Indy. Well, I say it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect IndyCar, because it's still super competitive. They give points out for number of laps led as well. So they've got all sorts of things going on. And like you say in the V8 supercar, if you're not hearing that anyone is complaining about it impacting anything, then I don't see what the issue is. I think it's just F1 trying to progress and modernize, but also trying to keep its roots in its historic nature. And they're kind of grinding up against each other, and they're coming out with this weird sort of mishmash of it that nobody likes.
You see this with cycling all the time.
Sorry.
By the way, it's similar.
And that's where I agree with whoever said earlier that the FIA and F1 need to be the ones who kind of put their foot down with the rule making and decision making for the future of the sport. Yes, it's great that we have a democracy with the teams, and they get a lot more input than they used to. I'm thinking back to the Max Mosley days, Jean-Marie Balest as well, very much a dictator style of running the sport. But how much of a say is too much of a say? When teams think only with their own self-interests. As much as we love what they do, they're essentially putting the show on for us week in, week out, putting 20 cars on the grid and giving us the racing. But how much power is too much power? And what is the purpose of your governing body and your commercial rights holder if they're not kind of the ones coming up with the ideas and then enforcing it? Even if it is a bad idea, at least stick with it, which is what we've seen in the past when people like Bernie, Max Mosley and Balest, for example, were running the sport. So yeah, if they're going to come up with this idea, just stick with it, and not let the teams get too much of a input in deciding how it goes, because they're going to do what suits them, obviously, as much as they talk about, we've got to put on a show for the fans. Yeah, right. They're doing what suits them, not anyone else.
Look at the track limit situation. Now that they just enforce it, it's the white line everywhere and anywhere. That's it. It's concrete. The teams all know the score. They know if they go off, that lap is gone, regardless of whether you gain an advantage or not. You've exceeded track limits. You don't have, in the Premier League, you don't have Manchester United and Arsenal going, actually, we want a specific pitch size, which benefits us because we play a certain type of football because we've got a big pitch anyway. Stoke City used to cause so many problems because they made their pitch really tiny. They grew the grass long and they made it really difficult. That's the beauty of sports. The rules are there and you are told this is what you can and can't do. So you work within that. And if the teams have too much say, then they're just going to, like you say, Jawad, they're going to bat for themselves. And you've got all these alliances. Like the Red Bull have got 2 teams, Mercedes have got teams that they give an engine to and they go, okay, we'll give you a discount on your engine. But you have to vote with us. Things that favour us will help them favour you as well. So it's so sort of clicky in that sense. So this is, like Zach Brown was saying, you need the independency of each team that then votes for itself. It's tricky. So yeah, the FIA, the F1, they're not seeing eye to eye, and the teams are kind of only batting for themselves. So you've got this whole, it's a tornado. We could talk about this for for hours, but I'm sure everyone else has got things to do today.
I was going to say, yeah, no, I think we'll sort of bring it to close. The one thing I'll leave you with is, I'm just wondering how prescriptive the FIA would be if it was to regulate football. It's just like, well, you've got to have 5 mm grass, and it's only measured by the reference plane.
Sounds like that.
Yeah. I don't think Old Trafford would get in. Like, no, your drop off from the pitch to the outside the pitch is too high. Right. Thanks everyone for watching. I think we'll call it there. But obviously, thank you very much for engaging in the chat, and we hope you had a great time. Apart from that, goodbye.